Welcome to the USDA Food and Nutrition Services training session on preparing and submitting a planning APD, or known as a PAPD. This is the second module in the APD Process training series. The modules are best viewed in the order presented on this slide, as the APD process, requirements, and terminology continues to build on each other in subsequent modules. These are the acronyms that will be used in this module. Take a minute to look over them. This session will cover the purpose and goals of a PAPD, the required components that make up a PAPD, and the process steps that occur between FNS and the state agency. We will also cover the elements of a PAPD that FNS focuses on, possible conflicts of interest and how to avoid them, some tips on successful planning, as well as some lessons learned that states have shared with us over the years. The PAPD specifies the nature of the automation effort and investigates the feasibility, system alternatives, requirements, and resources needed to move forward with a system development project. PAPDs are required when a state agency wishes to receive federal financial participation or federal funding for planning costs. A state agency must use a PAPD when planning major system development efforts, enhancements, or upgrades to request prior approval of funds and state its assurance that the system will meet program requirements. Approval of the PAPD provides FNS upfront commitment for the planning phase of the project. Federal funds requested are subject to availability. The PAPD is a brief document that is used to notify FNS of a state agency's need for an improved information system and its intent to begin a planning process. It should specify the nature of your planning effort, such as reviewing other states' systems and comparing them to your current business processes and system to identify improvements. In addition, the PAPD should propose who will conduct your planning efforts. 3 variations that we have seen states use include planning conducted solely by state agency staff, obtaining the assistance of another agency within your state, such as an IT office or procurement office, or hiring a contractor to perform some of the planning activities. Hiring a contractor may require a procurement, and most often FNS approval is needed. This is covered in detail in a later session. SNAP and WIC have different dollar thresholds which trigger the submission of a PAPD. These threshold tables can be found in the FNS Handbook 901, Chapter 2. SNAP has a $6 million threshold in total project costs. Total project costs include costs for planning and costs incurred during the implementation phase. All WIC projects estimated to be $500,000 or greater require PAPD submissions to FNS. EBT projects for SNAP require a PAPD if new technology is being planned. All WIC EBT projects require a PAPD. Preparing the budget for the PAPD should help you estimate your total project costs. If your total project costs are expected to meet the FNS dollar threshold, you must notify us of your intent to replace or upgrade your current system and justify your needs by submitting a PAPD to FNS. If your estimated project cost is below the FNS threshold, we strongly recommend that you have some kind of internal planning process to prepare for managing a system development and implementation project. There are 6 major components of the PAPD, each describing specifics for the planning phase of the project. The transmittal letter is signed by the appropriate state official that identifies the state agency sponsor of the project, who has the authority to commit state resources, to request federal funding and approval, and to ensure project goals and activities are carried out as identified. This is important as you don't want to get down the project road and have a higher official stop the project. The executive summary describes the business need for a new information system. It should also include the challenges and shortcomings that the new system will address, its advantages, and the stakeholders who will benefit. Resource requirements describe anticipated staff and funds a state expects to apply during the planning phase and what it needs from FNS. A schedule of planning activities is a detailed description with proposed dates for activities, necessary procurements and deliverables, as well as the expected date planning activities will conclude. The proposed budget should identify estimated costs to be incurred by the state and any contractors for the planning phase. This should include costs related to staff time, equipment, travel, support, and indirect costs. Budgets should be submitted in an Excel format and list all expected costs by federal fiscal year and quarter. The cost allocation plan must include a description of the methodology used to determine the share that each entity will pay in the joint planning effort. The plan is required for SNAP and possibly for WIC, depending on those projects shared with the Farmers Market Nutrition Program and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program. Let's take a closer look at the PAPD budget. It is designed to capture the costs of the planning phase on a quarterly basis by federal fiscal year, or FFY. The budget should capture all anticipated expenditures. Additional clarification about costs can be added over time if needed. Preparation of a feasibility study, alternatives analysis, the IAPD, and RFP for a design, development, and implementation contractor are generally included as planning costs. The narrative description should have as much detail as possible and match the line items in the budget spreadsheet. WIC budget details should also note expected funding sources such as national technology grants, NSA, or OA funds. Some costs for hardware and software that are tied to the planning process may be approved in the PAPD. This is an example of the types of costs that your PAPD budget might reflect. State costs may include travel, staff time, equipment, IT support, and indirect costs. If the state procures outside assistance, contractor costs should be included and be broken out by deliverables. Budget data in the initial PAPD should reflect projected costs. PAPD updates will reflect actual costs to date with any future remaining estimated costs. This is discussed in detail on another session. A final PAPD budget which reflects actual cost will be submitted once the project completes the planning phase and FNS proceeds with the closure of the PAPD. To help you prepare your cost data, budget spreadsheet templates are available on the APD website under the Document Library link. The duration of the planning phase will vary from state to state and project to project. Let's talk about the overall APD process that occurs between FNS and the state agency. Once you have decided what you want to do, the process steps for a PAPD are relatively simple. The first step is to prepare and submit your PAPD documents to FNS. We prefer this to be done electronically. You will send APD documents to your FNS regional office with a copy to your state systems office analyst. State agencies should submit all PAPDs and related documents directly to FNS. If the project benefits programs and other federal agencies, there should also be a submission to those agencies when requesting FFP. This may also be done electronically with one email copying all recipients. Federal agencies are independent and submissions to and/or receipt by one agency does not suffice as submission to and/or receipt by all participating agencies. Please be aware that if your state has an internal IT oversight process, this should be incorporated into your plans. An IT office, as well as a procurement office, may affect your internal state clearance process for the project, both in terms of the preparation of additional documents and the timeline for the project. Even though FNS and the states have different actions and responsibilities in the APD process, they more often complement than detract from each other. You can probably use the same or similar versions of project planning documents to satisfy both FNS and your state's internal clearance process. The APD is now in FNS hands, and this begins the 60-day review clock. FNS is allowed 60 days to conduct our review of your documents after receiving all PAPD-related information. During our review, FNS is looking to be sure this is a sound document, describing your needs that can be accomplished within an acceptable time frame. FNS reviews the entire document, as well as the proposed budget, along with the regional program staff. If there are questions or clarifications needed, FNS will send them to the state agency. This will stop the 60-day review clock. FNS will expect a response to the questions, and in some cases, this necessitates submission of a revised PAPD and/or budget. When the state responds with a resubmission, the 60-day clock starts again. It is important to note that approval of the PAPD must occur before entering into contractual agreements. Please remember that you can and should talk to FNS before you finalize your PAPD. We can give you the benefit of our experience with other states as well as guidance on the APD process. When the PAPD is sound and supports the state's plans, the document is ready for approval by FNS. FNS approval will either be of a general nature or it will be specific, subject to particular conditions. General approval expectations may include availability of federal funds, which applies to WIC in particular due to the grant process, and general approval expectations always include submitting APD updates. Examples of specific conditions could be funding for a specific time period or incremental based on conditions such as submission of quarterly progress reports. Once approval for the PAPD is obtained, the next step will be for you to conduct your planning activities. These activities will include preparation of a functional requirements document and conducting a feasibility study with an alternatives analysis. Remember, updates are required annually or as needed as described by Handbook 901 in Chapter 2. Let's summarize the process from inception to closeout. FNS receives and reviews the planning APD. Remember, 60 days are allowed for review, and we may ask for additional clarification from the state agency if needed. The state agency resubmits a revised PAPD based on any needed clarifications as requested. This starts the 60-day review time clock again. If no further clarification is needed, then FNS either approves or disapproves the PAPD. Disapprovals may be appealed through a request to the regional office. If a state agency is opting for contracted services for planning, you may submit the RFP for review with the PAPD. The state agency will carry out the planning activities as described in the approved PAPD. Updates will be submitted as required and defined in the FNS Handbook 901. After all planning activities are complete, the state agency will submit a final PAPD update with a complete budget of actual costs by federal fiscal year and quarter. FNS will then close out this phase of the project. Closure of a PAPD occurs when all activities associated with the planning phase approved through the PAPD have been successfully completed to the satisfaction of FNS and any other contributing federal agencies. FNS must close the PAPD to document the end of the planning activity and terminate FNS funding for this phase. Now that we have covered the required PAPD components and the process, let's look at what FNS focuses their review on. There are 8 key elements. First, does it thoroughly explain your objectives? For example, the purpose of the project is to transfer an updated information system which has current technology and is affordable to maintain. Second, does it demonstrate your project's scope? Such as, how will planning be conducted? What work is scheduled to accomplish the appropriate and desired results for the planning phase? Third, are your available resources outlined and demonstrated? For example, a steering committee has been organized, describing its members, their skills and responsibilities in relation to the project. What funds are being requested? Will contractor support or in-house staff be utilized, or perhaps a combination of both? Fourth, is there a discussion of key stakeholders' involvement? For example, who are the stakeholders and how will they be involved? What are their relationships with other programs or organizations? Are other federal or state programs involved or affected? The next element should cover: Number 5, costs. Are your proposed costs justified? The budget narrative should support the line item budget. 6, system transfer. Is there mention of a commitment to considering a system transfer? For WIC, the planning process must include a feasibility study and/or alternatives analysis with at least one of the SAM systems as an alternative. 7. Does the PAPD include an itemized planning budget by federal fiscal year and quarter? For WIC, are requested funding sources identified? And finally, number 8, cost allocation. Is a cost allocation plan and methodology included if applicable? These 8 elements properly described are the basis of a well-developed PAPD. When the planning phase of the project is complete, you should possess the necessary information to prepare and submit the Implementation Advanced Planning Document, or IAPD. The IAPD will have the results of your planning efforts and your course of action supported by all the work you did. You are now at the finish line for the planning phase. You should also be prepared to write and submit the Request for Proposal, or RFP, for a design, development, and implementation or transfer and implementation contractor. Once the IAPD is reviewed and approved by F&S, then you have successfully made it to the next phase in your project, the implementation phase. Now we are going to move to a very important topic: your procurement plans and conflicts of interest. Why bring this up at the planning phase? You need to think early on in the project about what in-house resources you will use to work on your project and what pieces may need contractor assistance. A conflict of interest is any situation that could impair a contractor's ability to provide objective and impartial information, advice, or counsel, or which could create an unfair competitive advantage for the contractor or its subcontractors. As you outline the plans for your project, this should include an anticipated procurement plan. Think about the range of contractor services that you might need or want to use, such as contractors for planning, project management, development, and quality assurance. You should consider the conflicts of interest for contractors working on the various pieces of your project, so that you can anticipate what restrictions you'll want to include in your RFPs. This slide shows examples of conflicts of interest. It wouldn't be prudent to have the same contractor who does planning or project management to also do development work on the same project. There are probably other potential conflicts that may occur to you as you map out your project plan. Be aware of these risks and be prepared to manage conflict of interest when using contractor assistance. If you don't think early enough about how to integrate all of the contractors you plan to use, it will be harder to prevent conflicts of interest later in your project. We just saw quality assurance in the context of conflicts of interest. Now, I'm going to give you a little more information on quality assurance, also called QA. These are procedures put in place to assure that your project and product meet your specified requirements. In addition, quality assurance is a continuous management process that can take place throughout all phases of the project. It is a focus on the quality of the services being provided. Let's go over what happens during the quality assurance process in terms of what, how, and who. What happens? Quality assurance is an independent monitoring of the project status. How does this really happen? Through formal reviews of schedules, timelines, and accomplishments. These are monitored to ensure that the project is on track and remains within scope. Deliverables are reviewed to ensure they meet contractual requirements and state expectations. Costs are reviewed to ensure that the project stays within budget. And who conducts quality assurance of the project? This may be handled by either state staff or by a quality assurance vendor. But this role must not be performed by a vendor who is also providing project management or system development services. Can you see why? In essence, they would be reviewing their own efforts, and therefore no independent assessment of the project status would occur. This would be a conflict of interest. Now we'll move on to tips for successful planning. Be sure to engage stakeholders and collaborate early in the project. Staff from all levels and departments work together to make your programs effective. Maintain communication with partners throughout the project. For instance, if your IT department is centralized, they may be responsible for multi-program systems. Are they in touch with your project? Or perhaps your project affects partners outside the state agency, such as advocacy groups or retailers. Develop an effective communication plan to keep all interested and affected partners apprised of your planning efforts and results. Know the federal requirements and thresholds for APDs. The FNS Handbook 901 is your best resource. It lays out chapters specific to SNAP and WIC as well as project management and procurement. There are checklists and templates for your use as well as examples of budgets and status reports. You should also be aware of federal and state procurement rules and standards. State agencies use their own procurement regulations and standards to prepare procurement documents, providing they conform to federal standards. How will these rules and standards affect the 60-day review timeframe FNS is allowed for RFPs and contracts? Can reviews be done simultaneously? Confer with other states to identify best practices and gain from the lessons they have learned. Take advantage of any networking opportunities or meetings that come your way. We are going to wrap up this session by providing you with some lessons learned that states have shared with FNS over the past few years. Don't underestimate the importance of project management. Hire a project manager early in the planning process. This may be someone in-house or a contractor. They will alleviate the day-to-day project oversight, freeing you to focus on your program. Obtain the support of your state's leadership, managers, and administrators. The earlier they are aware of your project, it is more likely that you will have their ongoing support. Your RFP process may put your state agency at the mercy of your state procurement office, but you need to craft the statement of work and ensure that you have control of those provisions such as evaluation criteria and performance criteria, which will most affect getting the deliverables that you want and need. Don't rush a process and compromise on quality. Build in sufficient time to review your APD documents and RFPs to ensure that they say what you want them to before they are submitted to FNS for review. A realistic level of effort for different phases of the project is important. For example, don't sell yourself short on user acceptance testing. This is where system errors or bugs are found and can be fixed before a pilot test is attempted. Think about the impact to your staff and their workload. Are staff spending so much time on the project that their regular duties are not getting accomplished timely? You might need to backfill their position. Remember that in the end, people will use the system that you are building. Be upfront with what you can feasibly handle in the project and what factors your agency may not have control over, such as internal review processes or IT standards. And finally, if you actively engage all of the people that will be involved and impacted up front, you will increase your likelihood of success. Promote what is happening throughout the project effort and obtain buy-in from your staff. State agencies historically have not had significant problems with preparing their PAPDs. The challenge is the actual pre-planning that must take place in order to prepare the document. Everyone wants to engage in good planning, especially when systems will likely be in use for many years and their planning and development has involved a significant amount of time, energy, and funds. We look forward to our partnership with you as you move through the different phases of the system development lifecycle. Well thought out planning will get you started on the road to a successful project. You should now be able to apply what you learned in regard to writing a PAPD, what components make up an approvable PAPD, and effectively use the review process between FNS and the state agency. You know when the 60-day review clock starts and stops, understand the key elements FNS reviews in a PAPD, and how to identify possible conflicts of interest and avoid them. You know something about the benefits of engaging stakeholders, knowing APD requirements, and talking with other states. Lessons learned include hiring a project manager, impacts on your staff, and communicating with all affected by the project. Congratulations on completing this module. Your next goal in the APD Process series will be the Implementation Advanced Planning Document, or the IAPD. This completes the session on the Planning Advanced Planning Document. If you have any questions, please come and see us at the FNS APD website as noted on this slide. The FNS Handbook 901 is your best resource. You may also contact us if you need more information or assistance. Thank you for your time.